Out in the rural heart of America, where cattle graze and the fields stretch as far as the eye can see, a quiet town sits nestled in the valley. Generations of farmers and ranchers have lived here, people who trust in their soil, their livestock, and nothing more. This town had never known fear until the ground beneath them, the tomb that bound something dark, was disturbed. It started when an archaeological team came to this quiet town, lured by whispers of an ancient burial site. Beneath layers of soil and rock, they uncovered the tomb of a god whose name had been forgotten, yet whose rage had endured. When the first infection hit, no one thought much of it. It began with minor, unsettling symptoms, eyes that began to blur and sting, a strange itching beneath the skin, headaches that throbbed with a rhythm they couldn't ignore. But as the infection spread and more of the townsfolk fell ill, the symptoms grew darker. People began to lose their sight entirely, their eyes clouding over in a film of unnatural grey, and yet they swore they could still see. But what they saw wasn't the world around them. It was something else, something that stared back at them. As their blindness consumed them, a peculiar thing happened. Infected villagers began to develop markings on their skin, symbols that seemed to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Those who could still see saw the marks twist and change on their skin, ancient symbols no one could read, but everyone instinctively feared. A desperate priest tried to exorcise the curse. He was new, young, and unprepared. He gathered the infected in prayer, but they only grew more fearful. The god of the tomb had no mercy left. Each person cursed bore the god's rage, a vengeance that seeped into them from the tomb's darkened walls. The god was imprisoned long ago by humanity, bound and hidden away in a tomb so far from civilization that it was meant to be forgotten. It had been worshipped, feared, and finally betrayed by its own followers. The people of its time had been relentless, believing they could steal its power for themselves. When it awoke, centuries later, it found humans still driven by greed, still willing to take without fear of consequence. Now, the god's vengeance spread through the town, a punishment for ancient sins. Each infected villager became a vessel of the god's hatred, the blindness forcing them to witness visions of betrayal, despair, and every secret horror they held in their hearts. Those who resisted were tormented by visions of a watcher, its eyes dark and endless, promising to claim them completely if they dared defy it. The priest fought to hold the town together, but every exorcism failed, every prayer unanswered. The god's wrath had rotted too deep, its hunger for justice too great. As the townsfolk succumbed one by one, the priest realized that this was more than an infection. It was an ancient curse, an unstoppable spread that no human power could reverse. The last of the townsfolk were drawn to the tomb, compelled by visions of eyes staring at them in the dark. And there, as they lay on the cold earth, their sightless eyes opened to a world beyond human comprehension. They were no longer victims, but witnesses, eternal watchers of the god's suffering, a suffering that would only end when every living soul bore witness to its rage. And so the infection spread, an unending plague, a final testament to a god betrayed, now watching the world through the eyes of those it cursed. The ancient god's desire for revenge is driven by the betrayal of humanity, worshippers who once depended on it and then sealed it away, hungry for its powers but fearful of its strength. The god's revenge is to implant itself within the humans, forcing them to live in constant terror and blindness, as each infected soul becomes a piece of the god's curse, spreading the suffering indefinitely. It's a fitting punishment, one that allows the god to experience the twisted satisfaction of seeing humanity collapse under the weight of its own fear and ancient sins.